Thank you, Bridget. I will, in my opening remarks, draw on a piece that I published in Der Spiegel in Germany this week, and it has just been published in English. So if you want to go back into it again. And I mention this not only for publicity reasons, but also because I think there was a message to be sent to Germany and to the European discussion, which is, don't simplify this Italian discussion. It is far more complex than Greece or anything we've seen. And I think this was an important message to be sent. In these short introductory remarks, I would like to make 8 very quick points. The first point is, the word of the moment is really trust. We are about to enter some kind of new cultural conflict in the euro area, which can be very dangerous. In Italy, people say it's really Teutonic austerity, this German austerity, that brought Italy into this trouble. In Germany, people think Italy is really the weakest link of the euro area that will eventually destroy it. Those simplifications do not help. I really think we need to do a lot to rebuild trust. The second point is, no one should oversimplify the economic situation in Italy. It's the largest debt stock, 2.3 trillion. It's the lowest growth rate. Per capita GDP has stagnated in the past 20 years. This means Italy didn't have this pre-crisis boom we saw in many other countries. Just 2 other figures, youth unemployment at 30%, and this rate calculated by the OECD about people, or young people, not in education, not in employment, not in training, is 20%. So 1 in 5 Italians is totally disconnected from the labor market and a professional future. Now you add to this that Italy respected the EU deficit rules since 2013, but didn't really get any kind of payoff from this kind of policy. You know this discussion about the Monti policies. Then you have the perfect recipe for a political collapse, and no one should be surprised. The third point is, there are no simple solutions to this kind of context. Italy is too big to fail, but Italy is also too big to be rescued. And my sense is, economists and politicians are totally lost what to do with Italy and which strategy to devise for Italy. You know, some people say, leave the euro. Then people say, abandon austerity. Others says, we need even more austerity in order to get at grips with the debt stock. Should the country restructure its debt? Should there be some kind of debt redemption fund helping Italy to solve the debt problem? All these recipes are dangerous. Most of them would produce some kind of political or economic crisis, and therefore the situation is so fragile. And many of those options, if we think it through, are not really on the table. If Italy left the euro area, we would go into the mother of all crises. A haircut on Italian debt, if we compare it to Greece, roughly 50%, Greece was 53, would wipe out 1,000 billion euros overnight. Some people would lose that money. That's pensions funds, that's insurances, that's banks, that's people in Italy. So this is just not a recipe that can work. But a bailout package at the scale of what we did with Greece, Portugal, and other countries is equally unlikely, if not impossible. It's just too large and too expensive. So we don't have a simple answer to the situation at which we look right now. The fourth point is very short. There is now also a dilemma in Italian politics. And the dilemma is quite simple. We have a parliamentary majority and a government that was elected on changing the austerity approach of the Italian government. You now have 2 options. Option 1 is you cut spending against the will of the parliamentary majority, and therefore of the Italian people, and you go into an even deeper political crisis. Or you spend more and you risk markets turning against Italy and pushing Italy to something like a euro area exit. And that is obviously a very dangerous dilemma, which to some extent we could compare to the Greek situation. But again, as Italy is too big to be saved and too big to be rescued, the way out is much more complicated. A fifth point is a point I would like to make in particular to my German friends. The ECB should not be part of the Italian stabilization equation. It's not the ECB's role to fix political crisis. The ECB has a toolkit ready with the OMT, but the OMT requires a fully fledged ESM program, and we doubt Italy can go into such a program. But I would like to make a bigger side remark here, which is it would be cynical from politicians today to rely on the ECB to fix this crisis. There was so much criticism in Germany when the ECB reached the limits of its mandate in stabilizing other countries that it would just be totally cynical now to say the ECB should do it. So what should happen? I think for Italy, the euro area needs some kind of new approach, which unfortunately will be very complicated, very technical, non-intuitive, and messy. What we need is some kind of simultaneous move towards supply-side reforms, as economists like to call them, that the Italian government needs to commit to, and this needs to be a strong commitment, which is difficult for this government. And at the same time, there needs to be an investment demand-side type of assistance which the EU has to put in. The problem is that this type of dual approach is not what the EMU framework, even the reformed one, can offer. The ESM is a firefighting instrument, not an instrument to rebuild domestic demand and kickstart the economy. And so the question is really, how do we implement such a stepwise parallel approach between the euro area and Italy? The seventh point is then, while reaching this agreement with Italy, EMU needs to be completed. And I'm not going to go into details on that point. We've had several discussions with Ramon, with others, about the Franco-German report. Jean is a co-author of that. But perhaps we can put this into the Italian context. The first reason why the euro area needs to be completed is no government should ever be allowed to blackmail the rest of the euro area, and blackmailing is more likely in a situation in which the disaster in one country actually gets all the dominoes to fall and produces a major crisis. Related to this, markets behave differently if the euro area is a completed construct with many safety nets. The moment you think one country can get the entire euro area to fall, speculation on the basis of this redenomination risk is likely to be very quick and almost unstoppable. What we propose in the Franco-German report is things like a backstop for banking union, safe assets, the deposit insurance, in addition to some kind of increased market mechanism. Now the last point, the eighth point, is a comment on the current situation in Germany, the Merkel interview, and where do we get from here. So I think my message, I hope, was relatively clear. There is no simple answer. If you think, if you ask, so Henrik, what would you do? I don't have a simple response to that question. What we need is a rebuild of trust, this stepwise engagement between Germany and Italy and the euro area and Italy to provide economic support in exchange for some kind of reforms. I think Merkel, in her interview, in that famous interview in Frankfurter Allgemeine Sonntagszeitung this weekend, actually was very close to what I've just presented to you in her signals and in her wording. She said, youth unemployment is too high, there's something we need to do about this in Italy. Now compare this to what she said initially about Greece. We have a very different sound here. She also said that the migrant or the migration situation in Italy was something she understood very well. She said, I quote from memory, Italy had the impression of having been left alone after Libya collapsed, and that was a mistake by the European Union. I think she didn't use the word mistake, but the message is very clear. And so this overall positioning of the German government to say we need to rebuild trust, we need to get into some kind of constructive relationship is what's now out there. I share that view, and I can only ask all of us, all the politicians, all the economists in particular, and I think about some German friends who have poisoned this discussion in recent days, I can only ask all of us to stay very, very pragmatic, not to try to find simple answers, and do everything to rebuild trust. Thank you.
Thank you, Henrik. Raymond.